I grew up in a church home. I grew up in a youth group. I grew up going to Sunday school every day. And I think when I think of discipleship, like literally in my day-to-day life, I think of it kind of in two ways. I know a lot of my students, they come from a completely different background. They come from a post-Christian society where they grew up, like you guys, they didn't have the Sunday school. They didn't have the youth group to kind of fall back on. So everything's new. And so I feel like I'm getting to share something new with them every day, every time I meet with them. And then on the flip side, those who did grow up in the church, I felt like a lot was assumed. Like a lot of my biblical knowledge was assumed. A lot of my just relationship with Jesus was assumed. And so I kind of want to make sure that whoever I'm with, whoever's either discipling me or whoever I'm discipling, they know exactly where I'm at. And we start there where they're at and what they know, find out, kind of dig a little deeper into where they are.
Yeah, I would, for me, just thinking about my youth group, and we do have the plethora of kids just from, either their parents are there or they're not. And one of the issues we've come up with or we've discovered is a lot of our kids think they're Christians because their parents are. And that's just it. That's the end of their testimony. And so for me, it's about being authentic with them and being that model that, I did have the parents that showed me. And so I want to be kind of, a little foster parent for them and show them, hey, here, look, this is what happened to me at work. I'm not going to give you all the details, but, this happened. I messed up. I felt, I racked with guilt for a week about it. Here's how I got over it. Here's, the scripture I went to. Here's how I prayed. Here's that, and try and be that model that maybe they have or don't have, just extra reinforcement or the only one that they have. And it's kind of a lot of pressure sometimes.
Yeah, and I just to add to some of that, because I love the ways you guys are describing this, mentoring, modeling, just being with, and what it looks like to capture the imagination of what your dad was practicing every day in your home. Those are awesome things. I think for me lately, what I've been thinking a lot about is what it looks like for us to maybe reimagine the phrase, be like Jesus, in the sense that, that's a phrase that we often say a lot. Well, I was trying to help kids be like Jesus. But again, you can always ask a further question like, well, what does that mean? And for me lately, what that means is how do I help students live more deeply into who they were created to be and their humanity? Because I think Jesus, one of the things that he did was he obviously modeled, like you mentioned earlier, Kelsey, the 12 disciples, and he walked them through this process, Emmaus Road kind of a way, as you mentioned, Ken. But I really think Jesus came to really show us how to live and to live into the humanity. And so very early from Jesus' life and in Matthew, when we look at, the temptation, he's overcoming these things and saying, this, you can do this too. And in a sense, undoing everything that Adam did, right, and the lineage did, and saying, no, it doesn't have to be that way. It can be reversed. And so, I know you've heard that phrase a lot, you guys, be like Jesus, right? So how do you feel about the way I've just described it in the sense of maybe reimagining what it looks like to live into your humanity, how you were created in the image of God? Keegen?
Yeah, so much I think we can become tempted by is actually a failure of imagination, is that we begin to think of what discipleship is, and then we begin to think about Christ, and then we look at the culture around us and say, this must be what discipleship is, and we settle. We begin to settle into what that reality is that comes for us. And so sometimes I think we're guilty of a failure of an imagination to actually be legitimately who Christ compels us to be. And so often the temptation you fight against is, do you feel isolated in that at times? Is that for me to actually expand, could I really actually do that? With students, with me, I've discovered they're less concerned about what I can teach them about discipleship and more about how I can lead them into that. And so if we can actually creatively think together about discipleship being an act of doing, not necessarily a little less talk, a lot more action, I guess maybe is one way to describe it, is one way that it's been an empowering experience a lot of times for our students, not just to talk, but this week we're going to go journey and do this together, and you journey and walk with them in that process. So. That's great.
Jesus was a radical thinker, and he changed a lot of things. And I think trying to teach our students that it's okay. Some of them really embrace being different, and some of them are totally afraid of it. And to give them the courage to, you know what, that's a crazy idea, and I love it. Go forth and do it, and help teach them to, and work alongside them to follow whatever dream Christ has placed in their heart. I think that to me is, that's who Jesus is. He was crazy and in an awesome way.
Greg, let me ask you this. All right. So the other day I'm landing in San Francisco, getting ready to speak at a conference, and I'm on the shuttle bus to get a rental car. And you know how inevitably it's like, hey, what do you do, right? You feel compelled to ask somebody. So this guy leans over to me and says, so what are you doing here? And then we start engaging in a conversation. And, you know, one of my responses, because one of the things as I do is I work with teenagers, right? So you say, well, I work with teens. And people are always like, you do what? That's crazy. And then they start throwing out things like, well, this culture is just ruining kids, and kids aren't what they used to be. And I try to remember to help them see that they're human beings too, right? Yeah. But let me ask you this. I'll start here with Greg. Like, not in an alarmist perspective, and I know you. I follow you on Twitter a lot, and I know the kinds of things that you're tweeting out, so I know you're not an alarmist. But, I mean, so I don't want to be like, oh, what are the things that are freaking us out about culture? But at the same time, what does concern you about the current environment in which, and it may be contextual, because I know the Maritimes are a lot different than Oklahoma, as different than California, but what is it in your context that does concern you about maybe even the way the church is engaging culture as it tries to disciple teenagers?
I think sometimes the church simply turns a blind eye to culture and says that we won't have anything to do with it, and because of that, they remain ignorant to the real issues that are involved within their local churches. I mean, parents often don't understand what their kids are really dealing with, and they expect the youth workers to take care of that. So I find that the challenge for the church is to not be ignorant to what's really taking place in their culture, and also not be afraid. I mean, Jesus certainly wasn't afraid to encounter the man that was demon-possessed. So, and we say, well, we are going to steer away from sin, and we need to do that, but also we need to engage those who are lost and find a way to be relevant to the culture and not be fearful of the culture.
Yeah, that's a good response. Ken?
Excuse me. In my youth ministry experience, I've had the privilege to deal with a lot of these kind of post-Christian society kids who are coming in who have no church experience whatsoever. And the thing that I've found, both of those churches, even though I've had youth groups like that, the churches were very traditional churches, and they really struggled with those kids coming into their space. They really kind of placed prerequisites on them, like, okay, you have to come in, you have to dress like this, you have to talk like this before we can really do anything else with you. And that's my concern, I think, for the church, is that Jesus was radical. Jesus went to the dark places of the world to meet the people. He was out at the well with the woman at the middle of the day. He did a lot of things to reach a lot of different people, and I feel like the church needs to be like that as well. If we are going to reach out to a post-Christian society, a society that has no background with Jesus, then we need to be a good representation of who Jesus is, because that's going to be the first thing that they see.
That's great. So with that in mind, right, the church sometimes has difficulty with people coming into their space. And I know that's not true of every church. I've been to a lot of churches where it's like they don't have issues with that at all. It's more of an issue sometimes of what do we do with these people, right? I mean, here they are, these teens coming, and take children and adults as well. I mean, come on, we know that youth ministry is about ministry to human beings regardless of the age group that they're in, especially because they won't be there forever, right? We're helping to form people who are moving forward as they age in their spiritual formation. But as it relates specifically to the church, and again, I'm talking about, generalizations here. When it comes to what you just said as it relates to space and people coming in, what are maybe the 2 or 3 top things where you're like, I'm seeing churches struggle with these major issues that kids are having and kids want to talk about, but churches is like kind of, you said the word ignorant or maybe not aware. What are some of those things? I mean, let's name them. Let's just say these are some of the stuff that students are dealing with every day that the church is kind of like, I don't know if I want to touch that. I mean, and I'm kind of lobbing you this one a little bit. I mean, let's be honest, but let's hear some of that.
Well, for us in Canada, a big, huge issue is self-injury, cutting, and depression. And those topics we never talk about in Canada. Those are the stay away topics. But yet in our district, we have dozens of teens that are involved in that, and just even having simple conversations. I don't understand it. I've never injured myself in that way, but try to get into the mindset of what it means to do that to yourself. I think the church, at least our church in Canada, doesn't talk about self-injury, and I think it's a big gaping hole in our church.
Yeah, good.
Along with self-injury, I mean, the way students experiment with their sexuality, I mean, is a huge one, especially the West Coast for sure. Being able to actually journey through, I've experienced that so often we turn the blind eye. It's because we're unwilling to actually become educated in the areas that now enable us to help journey with those students. And sometimes we turn the blind eye because we feel incapable of the help. And so it's, I know youth pastors, I think we love our egos enough to say that we feel like we have to be the problem solvers. It was really redeeming and freeing for me to actually be able to, when students are cutting themselves or even compulsive shopping in their depression or whatever those types of things happen to be, to actually be willing to lean into the people who have the degrees and who have the experience and who have the gifts to just say, you know what, this is one that I don't get, but I'm going to journey with you, and part of that journey means that I'm going to bring alongside people who can actually go to the root of that.
In an interdisciplinary kind of a fashion, like looking outside of the church as an expert in bringing people in that can help.
Totally.
Kelsey, what do you think about all that?
Well, our church is also very traditional, so we have a lot of generations in there. It spans the entire length. And for me, I'm a huge proponent of. I always think of judges and how just the word of God didn't get passed on to the next generation, and just how tragic it was. And I have been trying to build up relationships between our teens and our older generation because of that, the issues they struggle with. We have a lot of kids too that are questioning. Gay and lesbian has come out in our youth group. And then tolerance. Our kids are growing up in a society where, it's okay for me to believe what I believe and for you to believe what you believe, and we're all right, and it's hard for them to grasp the concept that there are some things that are not right. And because maybe they grew up in a home that is not Christian, they're not getting those ideals that other generations in our church can teach them. So I feel like the church as a whole, as a family, needs to not just let, the adults that are working with the teens go ahead and go work with them and we'll just watch from afar. I think it needs to be a family environment that really involves everybody.
We're going to talk about that in just a minute, okay, the family piece, because it is huge, right? As youth workers who are studying what the research is indicating, and research coming from all angles, not just, the organizations that we commonly go to and then the websites we commonly go to get information. It's coming out everywhere that the number one factor in a kid's life spiritually is their parent and their family. So we're going to get there, okay? I promise, because I know that's a passion of all of you. And Kelsey, thanks for bringing that up. But I just want to say this, that deconstruction, what we've been doing about, what we're missing in the church is easy. That's the easy part. It's easy to say, here's what we're doing wrong, here's what we could do better, But what are we doing right? Because I think sometimes we can go, you know what? This is broken, this is broken, this is broken. And it's almost like we become so buried in what is broken and in that deconstruction that we're not necessarily constructing a new way forward. And part of constructing a new way forward is saying, well, what is right about what we're doing? And right might not be the best term. I think maybe faithful comes to mind, because I don't like to talk about in terms of success and effectiveness. I like to talk about how are we being faithful to this. So Ken, let me start with you. How is the church being faithful in its discipleship of teenagers?
In my current context, I'm very impressed with how our church is just generous towards the youth of today. They want to make sure kids are going to camp. They want to make sure kids have enough food. They want to make sure that every person that walks in our door is taken care of. And there's a lot of other things I think the church does right, but that's one particular that stuck out in my mind, that they do genuinely, even though sometimes it's not expressed the right way, I think they have a heart for these kids and are very generous in making sure their needs are taken care of.
What do you think, Greg?
What I think is that there is a wind that's blowing, a wind of change that's blowing, that the church is willing to actually have these conversations. There was a time where we never had these conversations, but there's an emerging leadership that's saying, in order for our church to grow, we need to have these conversations. And that's what I think the church is doing right, is that they're willing. Now, they have identified the places where we are weak. And now we're saying, all right, we are greater. We are more than conquerors, as the Bible says, and we can rise up to this challenge. And no longer will we be defeated, but we can have victory. And so that's what I think the church is doing right, is willing to have the conversation, which I think there was a generation where conversation just didn't take place.
I think we do. I think in youth ministry specifically, we really do presence well. And the reason I say that is that there was a big wave when we were just more concerned, a season where we were more concerned about getting kids to pray a prayer of commitment, and then we'd move on to the next kid that we could get to write a number on a card at the end of the year. And so, but in the midst of that, there's kind of become a spirit of discontent with that. And I've been excited to actually see the way in which even my volunteers have understood the importance of presence, and they do presence well. I mean, they know what it means to journey with that student through the darks and the highs and all of that. And so I've been really, really impressed by, at least in my context, the way I've seen my volunteers embody what it means to be present consistently in the life of a student.
I think the Nazarene Church as a whole provides so many opportunities also for kids to go and either experience God or serve others just through, NYC, but even on a regional and on a district level. And that's one thing I love about the Nazarene Church is they embrace youth. They don't just kind of push them to the side and say somebody else will take care of it.
That's great. I mean, for me, it's really all of those things too. I think one of the great things the church is doing that's being faithful is understanding that it's really about practicing resurrection as a whole. That really is what is going to help move that process of spiritual formation for the mission of God in everyone's life. And so we're seeing more and more people, I think, become interested in maybe not, being the person that's sleeping on the church floor at 3 a.m. at a lock-in. We're not, we still have trouble finding those kind of people to help us. But we are having people say, like, to use your word, Ken, generous. It's like, what can I do? I mean, I understand that things might not be wonderful as it relates to that. I get on the news this morning and I see this, or I check my email and I hear this story and things are broken. Yeah, they're broken, but it's something about the church's reimagination the last couple of years for the hope, the resurrection itself. And I just really have found more and more people saying, what does it look like in our theology of hope to take that with youth ministry, looking forward and saying, not just that these kids will be our leaders someday, although that's true, but what active role can they play now in the life of not only our church, but our community as a whole. So, I'd love to just keep talking about that. But here's what I want to do, because one of the key things for us as youth workers is engaging families. It has to be. I know all of you at some level have experience ministering to the whole family. And when I say that, we also know that for some that's single mom, single dad, that's a kid who's living in a home that aren't really his parents. And, when I say family, I'm like, their primary spiritual formation is not happening the hour, maybe 2 hours at the most, we get them during the week. So we know that someone else is playing a significant role in their spiritual formation. What does that mean for the church? Both what do we need to do, but then thinking hopefully, what does that mean long term if we can actually get it done? Go ahead, Kelsey.
I always wonder, what if the church, instead of, we have so many kids that do come without parents that then come to church with them. They stay home and the kid just drives himself up or hitches a ride with a friend. And what if the church actively said which kids in the youth group have families that do not attend this church and went after them? To me, I feel like if we embrace that idea, then the church would start to become more of a family unit, because then, older generations aren't just concerned about themselves. Now they're thinking, okay, these kids and these teens, how can we connect with their family? Then they make a connection with the parents. They make a connection with the kid. You start to get that whole, we're passing down, our lineage, our heritage of what we believe as Nazarenes and as Christians. If you can do that, it's hard, but it would be brilliant.
What do you think, Keegen?
Oh, I got thoughts, man. I've been excited to just, in my own context, the ways in which we've actually empowered families. I see the pendulum finally swinging back. Even when I first got into youth ministry, I recognized even the curriculum that was being written for me to lead students was all with one person in mind, tapped out, data transfer like crazy. And it was up to that Sunday school teacher or that youth worker to be the one that grew that kid up. And there was no sense of, we're in this together. Well, that created a serious tension. Parents feel that tension of, they feel responsible in many ways for their children. And then the curriculum that was being written, the church wasn't providing that for the parents to be that in the home. But what I now see is that even the way we're writing now is now more with the family in mind. That's actually exciting for me. And learning, part of it means that I appreciate that you mentioned the way you defined family. because we so often think of family in one specific term, and then the pictures on our foyers of our church embody a mom and a dad and 2 kids, and we've just eliminated a whole pocket of people. And so it's good for us to begin to lean in a little bit deeper into the family and the ways in which our job descriptions then fit. If my job description says then I'm a youth pastor, that creates limitations for me and expectations for other people on what I should do. And that actually creates an elimination. So if the balance, it's getting back to the rebalancing of scales. It's not 90% with students and 10% with parents. Youth ministry actually embodies the family, and it's leaning deeper into what does that now mean, breaking bread and those kinds of things. So
let's go over here to Ken, and then we'll bounce over to Greg, and then I want to get to some social media questions.
What I found, again, in my particular context, is that the kids were coming on their own. Mom and dad are staying at home. Mom and dad sometimes don't even know where they are. And so I've kind of focused my time and energy, because in our community the kids are so spread out, and we only do get that 1 hour with them on Sunday and on Wednesday night. I've tried to give the teens themselves tools, things to take home that they can in turn maybe start to disciple mom and dad. I've already seen that with one of our students. He came to Sunday school, and it actually wasn't his parents, but it was the family that lived next door to him. He came and he said, well, they have all these needs, they have all these issues. I don't even know what to tell them. And so I started, dialoguing with him on Facebook and giving him things to take to them. They had a lot of questions about Christianity. They had a lot of questions about what exactly he was learning in the context that he was in. And so I found that one of my roles is to help them be able to go into their neighborhoods, their homes, and disciple those around them.
That's great. Greg?
And I think also the church no longer is the place where students come for value, authenticity, for truth, and the parents. We live in a culture where the church is no longer that place of authority anymore. So the families simply don't allow their students to make church mandatory. When I was in youth group, I had no choice but to go to church. And now the age of authority is like a 13, 14, where the students can make their own choices now, and parents are saying, I don't want to force my kid to go to church because it may make them make a wrong decision down the road. And I think that's kind of where the family unit struggles, where the parents are simply giving authority now to the teenagers to make decisions. And you know as well as I do, 13-year-olds don't always make the best choice when it comes to that.
Can I chime in one more
Absolutely.
thing there? I've learned through my experience with students that typically the seeds of rebellion are planted in the heart of a child when you take their voice away. And I had this play out with a parent not too long ago, where I was trying to help him understand the value of his own vulnerability with his children as it related to the spiritual formation of his children. He was furious at his daughter because she'd been caught smoking marijuana. And he says, we didn't raise her this way. This is not who we are. And he was furious at her. And I just looked him square and said, Dad, you ever smoke weed? And he just, deer in headlights, looked at the ground. And he said, well, actually, I have. And I said, does she know that? I said, she's old enough. She's 18. He goes, no, why would I ever tell her? If I told her that, it would be a green light for her to feel like she could keep doing that. I said, actually, research says the opposite. That if you actually have the ability to be honest with her and say, this is what was going on in my life, this is what happened, this is why I stopped, this is the ramifications from my choices in doing to do that, I guarantee you the next time that she was provided with that temptation, if you as a parent have so much influence on her formation, she's going to remember that conversation with dad. So it's helping to equip parents with the ability to be vulnerable and honest. And they constantly think that if I'm honest, that means I'm just telling them that they can do it. And actually, the reverse happens.
I think that's excellent. And I know that we could spend an entire couple of days talking about this stuff. And I think it's great, and we should. We should find time to do more conversations like this and really just understand each other's context and how we go about really, living into this calling that we have, even deeper and deeper into this calling. I want to shift gears, though, for a couple of minutes, because I want to hit on another very important topic. And you guys will think this is funny, but a few days ago, someone came to me here and said, do you have any books or resources that would help me understand the Instagrams And I said, the Instagrams? I'm not sure what you mean. She's like, oh, and then eventually I understood that she was helping me to try to understand what she wanted to know was Instagram and social media and these things. And I know this is a huge topic of I think, hope, because I just think it's another mechanism to engage students in conversation. I know there's a whole other group of people who are kind of freaked out by it, and Snapchat and all these other things. And of course, as you go back to your statement about decision making at that process, you're going to make some bad decisions along the way. But given that, right, how can we use social media to help us in the spiritual formation of adolescents, not to just kind of monitor it, because that's just an alarmist kind of, I'm afraid somebody's out to get my kid kind of a way. But how can we really engage it in meaningful ways, and how can parents engage it and other youth workers engage it to capture the imagination of teenagers?
I've just recently, we have a student who has just a lot of questions about a lot of different things, and he's always nervous and can never tell me or explain it correctly to me when he's with me, when we're around each other, when we're at church. But when he goes home and gets in front of Facebook, he can message me exactly what he's feeling. And I have had so many conversations at midnight on Facebook with this student about what it means to be a Christian and how you deal with this issue or this issue or this issue. And I just think that social media provides a student so many more opportunities to be discipled in a lot of different places. They don't have to be with us in our office or at McDonald's or wherever. We can do it from anywhere. We can do it with our phone. We can do it with our iPad or anywhere. And the students, that's their world. So much of their world is spent in social media right now that if we're not in social media, then we're missing out. We're missing opportunity. And somebody else is in social media and they are talking to them about things. And so social media has actually just been such a great help to a lot of my teens, or especially the ones who are introverted and spend most of their time in that world. If I wasn't there, I'd be missing out.
Social media makes kids brave. They feel like for some reason that if they're on Facebook or Instagram or Twitter, even they can say whatever they want to, and it's for some reason they feel safe. I think first of all, it's important for us as adults that we need to step up a little bit and start teaching them, okay, this is what is appropriate, this is what is not appropriate. People are still reading, but at the same time then also train them to use that avenue to be able to reach their friends. They might not want to say something in class to somebody, but it may be through Facebook or Twitter or whatever, they might be able to, hey, I noticed in class today that you were really, upset about something, and I just wanted you to know that I'm praying for you, because then for them it's like, okay, only this one person knows, and I can sit here and take some time to word it in my mind before I send it. And I think it's an avenue that, if really embraced, can go very, very far. I know our youth group has a youth group page, which, talk about family. Parents we're constantly putting up pictures of, like, when we go on trips, what the kids are doing and announcements and everything. And I think actually the parents enjoy it more than the kids because they feel connected to what's actually going on and they love to see it.
That's great.
Yeah, following up to what you said, I think today's teenagers use Facebook as a release. It's almost like a live journal. Years ago, we used to write in books, so I never journaled, but my mom did a lot, and it's a live journal. So I can't have conversations with every youth in my youth group on the 2 hours I have with them, but I can read their Facebook walls and identify signals that say, listen, this kid's having a tough time. There's one young girl who I thought had everything together. She is the eye of every guy on our district. And I had just had a conversation with her. I just saw some things on her wall that were alarming to me. And so I messaged her privately and said, are you okay? You have to have appropriate filters in order to do that. But she was honest with me. They feel that Facebook and Twitter are safe places to put everything out there. And I think it's the most dangerous thing to do. But at the same time, for me as a youth worker, I'm thankful for those resources because I can't always have those tough conversations with the students to find out what really is happening with them. Because one-on-one, it's awkward. For you to tell me how you're really doing, you might not want to do that. But through email or text, the moment my phone goes off, I look at it instantly. So I think social media is a great way to get in touch with what teens are really feeling.
Wait, before you start, I'm gonna switch it up on you just a little bit. It's still social media, and you said something earlier about the fact one of the things the church is doing right is presence. So one of the questions that I get a lot is, so I'm a youth worker. I know that face-to-face is sometimes the best way, but I reach out through these media tools that we've just been talking about. Social media is becoming more and more a way of life. What do you think? Is the definition of community as it relates to the presence aspect, is it changing a bit? Should we begin to understand that maybe with teens, community might be a little bit different, and when someone feels a sense of someone else's presence might be a little bit different than maybe we experienced or generations a little older than us have experienced? I mean, I know you were probably thinking of something else to say, but I'm gonna let you bang that one out.
Okay. Oh man. I actually think that social media avenues are a response of a false sense of community. Maybe I'm old at 34, but I think it's more of a transition to earn the right to be heard. I use it as an avenue for that. I have the students that do the exact same thing, where they'll want to message and talk about they think they may be pregnant at 2 o'clock in the morning, through a text message, and it's safer for them to text me because they're not looking me in the eyes. But I use those. I've had to learn to ask really good questions, and I've had friends that have mentored me in the ability to do that. And so I use it as an avenue to authentic community, while I still think it's a false sense of a reality of what community really is. So while it may be changing and they're calling it community because we can connect in mass amounts, I think eventually there's going to be a great need with the saturation of social media, that it's gonna create a deeper hunger again for people to actually be in the authentic community environment. So I use it as an avenue for community, so that when they've opened that, they've given me permission to ask them face to face. So if I can ask the right questions to them and get the conversations going, I use it as an avenue then to be present with them face to face, because I don't want to lose that, but maybe I'm old in that sense.
So the presence, right? The proximity and the time that we spend in these media channels that we have really allows us to lead people into a greater sense of community, as opposed to just saying, well, that is the way community happens, but we can use these as tools. And I think that's great. I want to finish. This is the last question I'm going to throw out to you. And I want to end on a positive note. I mean, I feel like this has been a great conversation, and it has been positive, but I want to really just have us think through, what are the top 2 or 3 things in your context, right, that inspires you the most about what you see in today's teenager? Like, what is it? Like, you look at them and you're like, man, that just fires me up, or it inspires me, or it gives me a new imagination for why I do this. It deepens the call, and it just makes you go, this is why I wake up every morning and live into my calling as a youth worker. What are a couple of those things that jump out at you, say, today's teens, I love this about them?
One thing just happened for us recently. We went to go work at the place in Moore, Oklahoma, where the tornado just recently went through, and getting kids to come to events in our context has been extremely difficult. There's always something else bartering for their time. There's marching band, there's sports practice, there's just academics, there's all things kind of pulling them, and I have never been able to get more than a handful to sign up for any particular event. When we put out that we were going to go and work at Moore, immediately I had more kids sign up the night that we put that out there than for any other thing. And they went and they worked harder than I've ever seen them work. They poured their heart out into meeting the people that they were helping out, whose homes have been destroyed. I saw girls pick up beams from houses and take them out to the curb, stuff they would never do in any other place. And I just saw the teens' passion to help others, and not only help others, but to put aside that was the most important thing to them, to help others. And I continue to see that. I've seen other groups go and experience the same thing, and I've talked to other youth pastors who experience the same thing, that they just have such a missional heart to help people. And that's one thing that gives me great hope going forward in the future.
Kelsey?
I think of this one student we have actually at camp a couple weeks ago who became a Christian, a Christ follower, and he and it wasn't one of those like, you know, big dramatic things, but he came up and you could see it in his face and in his actions. He was dead serious. And he was like, he started having these conversations with us. Okay, what do I need to do? I know this in my life is not right and I need to change it, but I don't know how. Is there somebody that can help me with this? I mean, like those kind of questions. He would stay after lunch and pick up everybody's tray. I mean, even people we didn't know, because he wanted to start right then and there. And it's those kids that it's like you see it click and they're serious about their relationship with Christ, and it's not just a fad, you know, that's when I'm like, this is why I'm here. And then you take that and they become global. I mean, teenagers are so global. Human trafficking, I mean, whether they're Christian or not, they want to help the world. And and some of them are just, they are on fire for it. And it gives me hope that the church is going to have passion still as these kids grow up and as they become serious about their walk with the Lord.
Keegen.
Yeah, you both hit on mine. I mean, somebody once told me that if you want to find yourself, give your life away. Go give your life away and you'll discover distinctly who you are. And I see now more than ever students that are so globally connected to the world in which they live. They deeply care about the people who are being bombed on the other side of the world that they just watched live on their phone. You know what I mean? And so that global connection, but what that's doing, and this excites me, it's creating a generational tension. What I'm seeing is that students are going to college, and then when they graduate, they're not necessarily interested in a career. They're interested in giving their life away to that mission organization or that Peace Corps or whatever that happens to be for 3 or 4 years, and mom and dad are tearing their hair out. Because they think, when are you going to get a job? Because then by the time the kids really kind of settle in and maybe explore that, mom and dad are fierce because they're a decade behind in saving for retirement. And so I'm kind of a generational mutt. I'm caught between the millennials and the Gen Xers. And so I align myself with, I like that. I'm not sure about that. I'm both of the generations. But what I see that doing, it excites me because there's kind of a Jesus revolution that you mentioned, Kelsey, earlier. That is, students are so interested now in giving their lives away. I have friends who have quit their careers and started their own nonprofits because they're so deeply passionate about giving their lives away, and they're so discovering who they are. I'm so excited about the global connection and how that's going to continue on, for sure.
Yeah, for me, number one thing is authenticity. I'm trying to help students develop and understand who they really are. Students don't want to be fake anymore. They can hide under the mask of social media, and they can hide under the face-to-face conversations, but they have a deep longing within them to find out who they really are in Christ. And even if they're not Christians, just to find out who they've been made to be. And I think that's for me, what inspires me is that we now have a generation that no longer settles for the status quo. A mentor of mine says, never underestimate the power of the status quo, because we can settle, and this generation does not want to settle, as you guys have said.
In just a second, I'm going to turn it back over to Mark, but I just want to add to that conversation. I'm seeing two things in particular. One is this understanding or this reimagination for what story is, and like this idea that stories make meaning. And when we share stories, when we share narratives of each other's lives, it leads us to a sense of community. And it's in that community that the authenticity takes place. And that I wake up every day looking at, I mean, the two examples you guys gave, that was two stories, right? Those were real people, not just ideas and concepts about ways to do this. So story. The second thing for me is the word enough. Like, I think so many of today's students are like, I think they might have a better way of understanding enough and that what they really need in life, and it's produced in many of them a more simple life. Like, I don't need all that. I don't need all that stuff. I know it's like there's other people who need more than what, and I can just cut back a little bit and have enough so that someone else can have enough. And those two things with a myriad of other things help me wake up every morning and go, I love working with teens. I want to thank you for joining us, man. This has been a fun conversation. I do know that we're just scratching the surface when it comes to these things. So I just want to say thanks one more time, and also very specifically want to say thank you for doing what you do. I know it's hard work. I know it's in many ways a thankless job at times. I know that sometimes you hear just the negative stuff. You don't hear the positive stories. But I just want to say thanks from the bottom of my heart for being partners in God's mission to restore the world to its intended wholeness together. Thanks, guys.